Let it go sometime. It's
All
okay.
right, guys. For those who may not know what babyface heel means in wrestling terminology, again, babyface means good guy, hero. Heel means bad guy, villain. Tweener means in between babyface and heel. So I
Mhm.
came up with a list of athletes. Myself, BRF, undisputed world champ, will decide whether they are a babyface or heel. The first one is Tim Duncan. Now, Tim Duncan is a babyface in my eyes. No off the field, no off the court issues whatsoever. Consummate professional, plays hard. He doesn't have a lot to say. I get it. Big fundamental, plays in a small market like San Antonio, but the San Antonio Spurs with the Popovich, Duncan, Kawhi, Bruce Bowen, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Boris Diaw, all those players, they were like the New England Patriots of the NBA. Tim Duncan
Good
brings in a bunch.
analogy.
Yes, Tim Duncan. In some ways, he may not be Tom Brady as the GOAT, but if you want to make an argument, Tim Duncan, top 5 of all time, I ain't got no problem with it. Just like Tom Brady works hard, studies hard, plays hard, doesn't really have a lot to say, not really the most emotional type of guy. The only time I've ever seen Tim Duncan emotional, do you remember Champ BRF, Joey Crawford, when he ejected Tim Duncan from a game all because Tim
Yes.
Duncan was on the bench laughing?
Yes.
Yeah, that was yeah, what he did, not Tim Duncan, the ref. What you did was false, and I'm not even a San Antonio Spurs fan.
I
That
mean,
was
that's ridiculous. I mean, you're ejecting a player and he's on the bench and he's laughing. It's not like he said anything derogatory. It's not like you don't even know what he's laughing about, and you kicked him out of a game. That's the only controversy I've ever heard regarding Tim Duncan. You don't really hear any negative things about Tim Duncan, the human being or the person. Tim Duncan back then was the Jokic. Jokic, you look at nowadays. You mentioned a great analogy, champ. You've mentioned this before. Jokic doesn't have a lot to say. Jokic plays in a small market. Jokic is as accomplished, but at the same time, he no controversy, no nothing, no issues whatsoever. So I have to say, babyface with Tim Duncan. He's in the discussion. He's the greatest power forward of all time. Says all the right things. No controversy, no issues whatsoever. Tim Duncan is all about team. Tim Duncan is all about the team concept. He's willing to make sacrifices. Later in the season, he was able to extend his career. He lost weight because he knew in order for him to have a longer career, he had to take pressure off his knees and his joints, whatever. I ain't got nothing negative to say to Tim Duncan. He is, to me, the Undertaker of the NBA. Just like Undertaker doesn't have a lot to say as far as with mic skills, but behind the scenes, Taker's about business. Interesting story, Champ, because you've mentioned this all the time. Shawn Michaels. Remember WrestleMania 14 between Shawn Michaels and Stone Cold Steve Austin?
yeah.
Had Shawn not dropped the belt to Steve Austin, Taker would have done something. You've mentioned that. You've mentioned that
Mhm.
multiple times on my pod and other pods because Taker was about business. Tim Duncan is about business. Tim Duncan is about doing whatever it takes. That's why I call him the Undertaker. Doesn't get enough credit. I believe he should be more in the discussions with the top 5. I said, remember, Champ, we had a discussion. Me, you, Luis, Casual, Tim Duncan or Shaq. Who was the better player? Who had the better career? I said Tim Duncan because Tim Duncan was able to make the most out of it compared to Shaq later in his career. And Shaq had a hell of a career. Let me be clear. But I felt like Shaq, had he taken better condition or better care of his health and his fitness and his nutrition, Shaq could have been even more. He was still a great player. He definitely lived up to the expectations, but I felt like he could have been even more. So, with all the reasons that I said with Tim Duncan, babyface. Whoever wants to go.
I'll take it this
Go ahead.
time. Yeah, I'll take it. I mean, how how do you call him anything else but but a babyface. Tim Duncan is the babyface in the truest sense of the word. Like, never got into trouble. Never heard any scoffs of him with the front office or the coaching staffs. Like, he was always the quintessential team guy. And then not only that, is the greatest power forward of all time and in top 5 of all time conversations. So I mean, he was just he's the personification of consistency, of staying true to himself, and just like he is. I feel like, in terms of player wise, he is Mr. San Antonio Spur. So I feel like there's no other way you can analyze Tim Duncan other than the fact that he's a babyface. He was just the perfect. I mean, he was just the perfect example of just what it means as far as like what the San Antonio Spurs was trying to accomplish, what they were trying to put forth, as far as just what they wanted their franchise to be. He was the front runner of that. He was the leader of it. He drove it. He drove it home. And I have all the respect in the world for Tim Duncan. And for me, he is just the quintessential what it means to be just one of the like ultimate baby faces. So yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer. Tim Duncan's a baby face.
All right, hold on real quick. Sorry about that. Almost got undisputed champ off the second. Probably he got a little distracted because of the Mariah Mills joke I made earlier.
Oh boy. Boy, we ran that one like ooh.
Champ.
He's an undisputed babyface. To be honest with you, this is no disrespect towards Tim Duncan. He didn't even have the personality that really even invited trouble. It's just like he's the quiet kid in class that makes all A's, that was on the varsity team, that had his letter and was the valedictorian of his high school. That's what he was to San Antonio. And it's just like you really never heard about him in any type of shambles, any type of scuffles on or off the court. He was just a model citizen. Unfortunately, he didn't play in a big enough market, and his personality wasn't big enough for him to be the face of the league. You know, it's just unfortunate of that, because that's exactly what you wanted out of a player, to be the face of the league. You know, clean cut, didn't have to worry about, him being off the being in stuff he wasn't supposed to be off the field. I mean, end up going back because, remember, he was about to leave San Antonio in 2000. He was about to leave and go to Orlando. But, because of Doc Rivers, yeah, as usual, him and his bloopers, he ended up going back to San Antonio, and the rest was history. But that's probably the only if that's the only controversial thing that comes out of your career, that you almost left the team because somebody else was trying to back up a Brinks truck to your lawn and dump every dollar out of there. If that's the only controversial thing that ever happens in your entire career, you've won. You've won. And so Tim Duncan, man, the consummate professional. That's the guy who you hire as the CEO of your company. That's the guy who you bring in and say, this is who you're supposed to be like. That is the poster boy for what an NBA player, if you're a corporate guy, if you look at a picture of Tim Duncan and you look at his career, you say, this is what an NBA player is, especially if you're trying to market in corporate America. That's what you put there. I mean, and him and Dave, it is so ironic. They went from they transitioned from two of the most clean-cut guys, arguably in the history of the league. You transition from David Robinson, who was a Christian to the core and had the military values of the Navy, who went to Annapolis, which was a service academy, which is hard as hell to get into. Believe me, I tried to get into a service academy. In order to get into a service academy, you have to be nominated by a government official in order to get in there. It just can't be your grades is high. You have to be nominated by a government official in order to get into it. And they have to nominate you. So the transition from a guy who served in the military, had great Christian values, who was a credit to his community, that being David Robinson, to transition from him to being to Tim Duncan, that was probably the greatest transition in any franchise's history. If you're talking about being a face of the franchise, usually you don't get that clean of a transition because it's just like they didn't miss a beat. They transitioned from David Robinson, who was the most clean-cut player in the world. Then they transitioned and went right to Tim Duncan. You don't get a cleaner transition than that.
And they got 2 championships during the transition. That's what makes it crazy. They got 2.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at Tim Duncan, you look at the Spurs, they play the right way. Team constant, ball unity, movement, everything else. And Tim Duncan, look, man, like I said, he's the Undertaker of basketball. Taker doesn't have a lot to say. Neither does Tim Duncan. But behind the scenes, they're all about business. And they will do whatever it takes to help the business. And Tim Duncan and Taker, last time I checked, they have integrity. So that's one thing we can all agree on. Now, the next one, Michael Vick.
That's a good one.
I agree.
He's a tweener.
I agree too.
He's a tweener. The reason is this, and I'm going to give you an example. I never forget when we posted that Michael Vick video.
I know exactly
when we was talking about him first getting that job at Norfolk State University. People still hold his off the field issues against him to this very day. They still hold that against him. Regardless of the fact that he's paid his debt to society, he's been an advocate for kids everywhere. He's been an advocate. He's opened up boys clubs. He's opened up schools. He's been an example, a prime example of what you need to be as far as turning everything around. And the thing is, usually when people get in trouble, when a lot of these guys get in trouble, you don't hear a lot of accountability for them. It's always some freaking body else's fault. I never forget the interview he did with Jim Moore, his former coach. And he said, and his coach asked him, Vic, is there anything that I could have done to keep you out of trouble? And he said, no. He said, the best thing that ever happened to me is I went to Fort Leavenworth. I had to go through that because I was arrogant, because I was not studying, because I was not doing what I was supposed to. He said, I had to go through that. And that was the only way I was going to get my life back on track. Now, to everybody in common, that's enough for you to not only take accountability, take responsibility, redeem yourself, come back and get another $100 million contract.
Let's not forget how good you were your first year in Philadelphia.
Yes. Get another $100 million contract. Because remember, at one point, he was the highest paid player in the league
NFL.
When he was in Atlanta. He was the highest paid player in the league. But for you to come back from that, come back from what you did, from what happened in your personal life, what happened off the field, and everybody just counted you out, for you to come back and not only have a comeback player of the year, miracle in the Meadowlands. And not only that, I mean, hate to bring this up with that Monday Night Football game in the Washington Commanders.
Woo!
That was nasty work right there. But for a lot of people, his redemption story, his way of redeeming himself will never be enough because they're going to harp back on that. Unfortunately. Although there have been players that had did a hell of a lot worse than what Vic did. Now, what Vic no, what he did was wrong. What he
We
did
agree.
was wrong. Let's not undersell that within the least. If you, we all have, I have a pet that's very, very close to me. Y'all see me put them on the internet and stuff like that. So, you know, my little dog, Rory, y'all know how she is. She always barking, eating up all my food out of the refrigerator, but I digress. But when it comes to dogs, well, fur babies, what we call them, a lot of them see them as human. And when you hurt a pet or a fur baby, you it's kind of equivalent in a lot of people's mind of you hurting a human or a child. And I don't think that the world, in a lot of people's minds, the masses, is ever going to forget that. To a lot of people, Vic, and to me as well, Vic is the ultimate redemption story of how you can be arrogant, you can be prickish, you can go around here thinking you got it all, thinking you know everything, thinking I'm paid in full. I ain't the law don't apply to me. To having that moment where you don't just have to eat humble pie, they take it out the oven. They take it fresh out the oven and they push the shit in your face and say, tell you to eat it. So that was a whole nother level of humble pie. They took it right out the stove while it was still hot and threw it in his face and told him, eat it. Or in the great words of Triple H, you had to eat crap and learn to like the taste of it. In that case, you had to eat the whole bag. Because Leavenworth, trust me, ain't no joke. Leavenworth is no joke. Trust me, I used to be in the military, and it is a soldier's worst nightmare to get thrown in Leavenworth. So that redemption story for a lot of people is an example to the world of how you can eat your humble pie and how you can be humble from then on. And not only that, be example for a lot of kids. Not to mention, man, look, him and his teammate, Deshaun Jackson, his former teammate, Deshaun Jackson, two HBCUs, Delaware State and Norfolk State, on October the 31st, two HBCUs are about to play in Lincoln Financial Field. I'm hoping that's televised. I'm hoping that it's televised because I'm gonna have my eyes glued. Even if my Georgia Bulldogs are playing that day, I'm gonna have my eyes glued to the television if they televise that game. But for you to come back from a situation like that, and he'll not just that, a situation that you admit you put yourself in, allowing God to shake your tree of all the loose fruit and all the bad fruit that's in your life. Remember, he had to let his homeboy go. If you watch the documentary, he had to let his best friend. Remember, at one point, his best friend wasn't even on the team at Virginia Tech, and they let his best friend have a dorm room. He wasn't even on the team, but Coach Beamer let him have a dorm room. He was allowed on campus, on the sideline, and everything. His friend Corners. He wasn't even on the team. But for you to come back from being arrogant, from being cocky, to being, just thinking that you know it all. And sometimes we all get caught up in our own little suite, man. Everybody. It's not just a humble person was once an arrogant person, in my humble opinion. Because they had to deal with the arrogance and they know how harmful that arrogance and being a butt can be. So the thing is, for you to come back from that from the highest to highs to putting yourself in the lowest of the lows, you are a prime example in American society and the society in general of how you can redeem yourself and how you can be a model citizen and how outside of anything, people don't hear so much as a peep out of you outside of the game of football, outside of mentoring young kids, outside of mentoring and being a credit to your community and opening up boys and girls club and being a main spokesperson for the Humane Society. But as I always say, 1,000 attaboys is equipped by one R, you know what. And unfortunately, his case off the field was his R, you know what. And that is what people That's what the masses is going to remember, unfortunately. And that is why he's a tweener.
Could have said it any better. Tweener. It's unanimous.
Yes.
Michael Vick's redemption story is one of the greatest stories from not only athlete but just human beings, because the epic fall from grace, and for him redemption, and for those who may not want to forgive him, who may not feel like he didn't pay his debt to society. To your point, champ, Leavenworth,
It's Leavenworth.
18 months. And if that isn't enough of a guy to say, you know what, I paid my debt to society, the legal system, I've contributed to the Humane Society, I've been an ambassador as far as helping young kids on and off the football field and in life. If that isn't enough to say, you know what, I've changed, I've learned the error of my ways, I've come so far in my life, what will? And if I'm Michael Vick, I can't be concerned about people who are unwilling to forgive me. That's up to you. But at the end of the day, I will forgive him because I do believe that forgiveness is the best way. Not just for the person who did wrong, but also for yourself. And I think Michael Vick has earned and deserved a second chance, because since his time in Leavenworth, you haven't really heard any off the field issues. Nothing. But meanwhile, and I'll bring this up, champ, and I know we've had this discussion before with double standards. There's a certain quarterback we mentioned as far as Babyface Hill, Brett Favre. He will never, in my opinion, will never spend a dime in jail. And we all know what he's been accused of.
Yes. But at the same time, like I said, you can't do certain things.
But we know that.
Do certain things. We can't do certain things to still keep your job. It will leave.
We know. Oh no, we know that. I know that you can't. You tell me all the time you can't do what the white men do and think you can keep your job. But at the same time, it's still shocking to me that with Brett Favre, even with these allegations, you mentioned about the low market in Green Bay, they're gonna shrug it because they look at Brett Favre, the football man, the family man, knowing what Brett Favre has been accused of. And Champ, you and I, and I'm quite sure BRF, we saw that Favre documentary on Netflix, and we knew what he was accused of regarding with Jen Sturger with the New York Jets. There was a lot more stuff.
What's so funny about that? It is not just a race thing. I'm just going to be real. A lot of guys have did a lot worse of stuff than Mike Vick. Remember Dante Stallworth? Driving
under the influence, and he killed the pedestrian.
You remember Jamal Lewis got held in contempt, got held up because this dude was literally moving stuff. Trying to keep it clean for the audience. He was literally moving stuff, and he's a professional football player. So I don't think it's much of a race thing. It's just people selective. I think it has a lot to do with people's selective memory. We remember what we want to remember. Because like I said, Dante Stallworth, Jamal Lewis. Let's not forget about Ben Roethlisberger. We mentioned that earlier.
Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy. Remember Greg Hardy?
Greg Hardy. Yeah, we remember. I don't think it's so much as a race thing. That's like I said, you can't do certain things and still keep your job. I think it's a lot about people's selective memory. And the thing is, Greg Hardy just the other day, he just got arrested again for the same thing. And the thing is, we remember what we would like to remember. We remember, hey, Brett Favre was the hero. We ain't seen that to happen yet. They remember Dante Stallworth was a part of that New England Patriots team that went undefeated. They remember that Jamal Lewis, ran for a whole bunch of miles, a whole bunch of yards, that 2,000-yard season. The fact that he ran into a Super Bowl on the offensive side of the ball, because outside of him and Shannon Sharp, they didn't have any offense.
All I'm saying is, champ, just like we remember Vic for the bad things, we should also remember Vic for some of the good things he did in his NFL career. And
Yeah,
you and BRF would certainly know this for a fact in Atlanta, the Michael Vick experience.
it was lovable. That was a time that I wish that I could turn back the hands of time and be grown during that time. But I was merely a teenager when Michael Vick was in there. Everybody was talking about him coming out of Virginia Tech. Everybody was talking about him, and we was a few years removed from that Super Bowl run that we had in '98. And so, for him to come to Atlanta, him being a black quarterback in the city of Atlanta, which was the mecca of hip hop during the time, the mecca. I don't care what anybody says. In the 2000s, early 2000s, Atlanta was the mecca of hip hop and R&B. For him to be in that city and bring back that excitement and being a quarterback of his caliber and just as exciting, it was nothing short of great. Not just that, indulging in the hip hop community. Remember, he was in T.I.'s video.
Rubber
I
Band
mean,
Man.
yes,
He was the he was the NFL's Allen Iverson.
yes, and not only that, every time you heard rap lyrics in the early 2000s, especially with Killer Mike, first round pick like Michael Vick, everybody wanted to be Mike Vick. Everybody wanted to play with Mike Vick on Madden 2004
Oh,
when he was at his peak. But the thing is, like I said, everybody has that selective memory in their head, man. And I think that has more to do with it than anything. If let's just say we go out right now, everybody will probably remember if we go out and let's go to if we go to a club in New Jersey, all of us meet up and go out, and they got you on tape punching somebody, or me on tape punching somebody. Depending on how light we are in the first place, they may or may not choose to remember that.
but the
You
bigger
see,
you are,
you see, everybody has selective remembrance when it comes to certain things. I think it has very little to do with the R word than it does people want to remember who they want to remember doing wrong. And I think that Mike Vick was the poster boy of people having that selective memory. When you look at the 2000s, guys was getting in trouble left and right. As a matter of fact, Nate Newton, who was an offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys, yes, he got in trouble for the same thing. That's probably what's keeping him out of the Hall of Fame right now. But because Vic was so high profile, because he was I don't care what anybody tells you, Vic was the face of the league at one point. He was the face
player in the NFL.
Yeah, the biggest attraction in the NFL. Because he was the face of the league, because of his stature, because him bringing back a team that was in just the dumps after the Super Bowl, after we had that bad year for a few years after the Super Bowl, because he was the highest paid, he was the face of the league. People are going to remember that a hell of a lot more than guys who did a hell of a lot worse. And I think it has very, very little to do with the R word, but it has a lot to do with selective memory. It's like, I'm going to remember this guy for what he did because I really didn't particularly care for him. But I'm not going to remember what this guy didn't do because guess what? I was a fan of his. That's just what I believe it is. Because the thing is, Vernon Maxwell, people don't remember the fact that he went in the stands and punched the guy in the face. We only remember right about now what he's doing on All the Smoke. People only remember what they want to remember depending on how likable or unlikable that they deemed you to be. That's what I truly believe. And depending on how likable or unlikable that you're deemed to be, is how you're going to go down in the history book. You don't believe that? Look at Dame Dash. Look at what he did for the record business. Look at what he did for Rockefeller. Look what he did for hip hop. But because he was deemed as unlikable, people paint him as a villainous figure. People only remember you based on how likable or unlikable that you were in their minds. Not necessarily the masses mind, but in their minds. So yeah, that's what I believe when it comes to Vic and a lot of these other guys. Because like I said, we've seen guys go down go down bad for a hell of a lot worse. A hell of a lot worse. We've seen some of the worst things happen in the NFL. Remember, I brought up a couple weeks ago during the football season, when football season was about to, remember the Kareem Hunt situation? When
Yes,
his first go around, people don't even bring that up no more.
because even though he was high profile, not like Michael Vick, he wasn't the face of the NFL. He didn't play the quarterback position. He wasn't on the cover of Madden, nor the highest paid player in the NFL.
Yeah.
I understand all those circumstances, champ, but and I think that's on us as a society. We have to hold each other the same way. But unfortunately, to your point, double standards. With Brett Favre, it's no surprise that he's no matter what, even with the Mississippi welfare situation or the situation with Jen Sturger. And people have forgotten this about Favre, though. How was he in Bankhead?
They used to call him
He ain't,
Bankhead.
he ain't earned that nickname for nothing.
They used to call him Bankhead Brett. What? No, my dad. No, we live in Columbus, and stuff filters down real quick because back then you had to be on the street back then. And I never forget my dad came back home from Atlanta. He used to drive stuff. He said, I saw damn Brett Favre up in Bankhead getting drunk. He said, hello. I'm like, what? He said, they call him Bankhead Brett for a reason. I'm like, what the hell? But, yeah, they used to call him Bankhead Brett, Decatur Brett, because he was all in the neighborhoods, in the black neighborhoods, out there getting drunk, getting lit up like a Christmas tree. And that's what they used to call him. I mean, they used to just, at one point, he was so, and he even said it himself, he was so addicted to opioids that he couldn't even go to sleep after he took them. That's how come he ended up having to go to
The rehab.
But like I said, it depends on the selective memory it depends on our perception of people at a certain point. We remember what we want to remember. It's just like people will tell you with certain singers, man, y'all ain't gonna never let that go. But then they'll, out of that same breath, they'll bring up another singer's transgressions.
Impressions.
Yeah. They want you to forget certain things about their big time guys. But when you talk about this guy, nah, man, remember when he did that? Yeah. But you remember when the main guy who's doing this thing right now, remember he did this? So yeah, I think it's about how likable that you are, how likable that you're deemed by the masses, and what people want to remember about you. If people want to remember the worst about you, they're gonna remember it. If people want to remember the best about you, they're gonna remember it. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's what I believe those double standards come from. I believe people have their selective memory. It's called we like to call it selective amnesia, if you ask me.
Yeah, I remember that. BRF, is there anything you want to add regarding Michael Vick before we move on to the next person?
You know what I do? When I think about Michael Vick and I think about his career and I think about the legacy that he left in Atlanta, Michael Vick to me is one of the greatest what ifs in the history of the National Football League from the standpoint of if we got if between 2001 and 2006, if we got 2010 Philly Mike Vick in Atlanta, what could have happened? And we're talking like a Michael Vick that was fully focused on the game, that was studying the playbook, that was honing his craft as an NFL quarterback to really be the best he could possibly be. If we got a Michael Vick who was focused in Atlanta, because I'm not even gonna lie, I was one of those who was saying, even though as much as I will ride with the thought of Peyton Manning being the second greatest quarterback in the National Football League ever, in my opinion, I will ride with that. At one point, I thought Michael Vick was going to get one before him because I just felt like the trajectory was there. I felt like the trajectory was there. They were already building. They were building that team around him properly. You got the defense that could get after the quarterback, that could get sacks, that could get him the ball back. You had a killer running game. You had the DVD running game with him, Ward Dunn, and TJ Duckett. That was by far the best running game in the league with him basically at the helm of it. You had a decent offensive line. I mean, Algie Crumbler at the time, one of the most underrated tight ends ever. If y'all don't know who Algie Crumbler is, watch tape of that man. That man was so good and bailed Mike out of so many bad plays. It's not even funny. But like I said, I feel like he's one of the biggest what ifs because we always think about what could have happened in Atlanta had he stayed focused and had he not stayed out of and had he stayed out of trouble. Would Matt Ryan even be in Atlanta had Michael Vick was fully focused and perfected his craft as an NFL quarterback with the Atlanta Falcons before that reality check hit him and going to Leavenworth and ultimately getting signed by the Philadelphia Eagles, but then having a guy like Andy Reid, who is a guru, who is an offensive mastermind, who you knew if Michael Vick was focused, he was going to get the best out of him. I feel like Michael Vick in Atlanta is one of the biggest what ifs in the history of the National Football League because it's one of those what could have been had, like I said, had you got the post Leavenworth Vick before it even got to that point. So this is what I say about him. I mean, the boy's unanimous. He's definitely a tweener, but it's about like how some fans view him. And I apologize about the screaming. That is my niece going on in the back. but but I like as much as I was disappointed about how things ended up in Atlanta, is as proud as I am of him for how he got his life together and where he's at right now, being the head football coach of Norfolk State. I mean, I wanted to see him succeed more in the National Football League as a quarterback, but honestly, the most important thing for me is seeing him winning in life. And honestly, you can't ask for anything more for Michael Vick. All his transgressions through the trials and the tribulations and everything he went through to see where he is now. I mean, it's you can't do nothing but throw up prayers and throw up blessings for him and be proud of him and understand that you only want the best for him and you hope it just keeps getting better for him. But like Champ said, man, people, you're still gonna have those that's gonna hold the bad things he did against him pretty much for the rest of his life. And that's why he's a tweener because you have those that are going to hold it against him, but then you have those that understand that people make mistakes. And if we're supposed to be a country of second chances and about forgiveness, you can't pick and choose who gets that. So at the end of the day, it's really just about him finding himself and getting his life back on track to where he is today. But Michael Vick is definitely a tweener. But in my opinion, he's one of the greatest what ifs in the history of the National Football League because it's like I said, if you get fully focused 2010 Michael Vick, what if you get that in Atlanta after he became the full-time starter quarterback? A Michael Vick who was fully focused, a Michael Vick who was studying the playbook, a Michael Vick who was truly focused on being the best quarterback he could be and not just being the biggest box office talent that the NFL had. If he truly became what I thought he was going to, because when you look at his tape at Vatech, everything showed that he could be a tremendous dual threat quarterback. He had really good pocket presence. We know he's got one of the greatest arms in the history of the National Football League. That's not even a question. But it was the fact that he could make those throws from the pocket and then add to the fact that he had 4.2, 4.3 speed coming out of the backfield. I mean, the dude is the greatest. In my opinion, I think he's the greatest anomaly at any position we have ever seen. And that includes Calvin Johnson at the wideout. That includes Aaron Donald at defensive tackle. That includes Deion Sanders at the quarterback position, at the corner position. I feel like Michael Vick is the greatest anomaly to have ever graced the NFL with his presence as far as what he could do at his position. I mean, it was just like it was unheard of. A guy with his speed and his ability to make plays and out of structure plays, but yet have one of the strongest arms we have ever seen. So I'm just glad that I'm just glad he's where he's at in his life and in his career. And I just wish him nothing but the best. And I hope he succeeds at Norfolk State. And I'm telling, and if they hear me, if they're watching this up there, I'm just telling y'all now, y'all got a good brother as your head coach. Y'all better take care of that man, because if you take care of that man, where his mindset is now, he gonna take care of y'all. So shout out to Mike, and I wish him nothing but the best. Yeah, but yes, the board is unanimous on that. He's a twin.
Another African American quarterback, Jamarcus Russell.
Oh, oh man, his story is weird. I guess my thing is he just sucked. He just sucked as a quarterback. He sucked as a teammate. Um, is he a heel though? I don't know. I don't know.
His
I
story
mean,
is kind of unique because remember Kirk Morrison when he went on the Rich Eisen show and he talked about how the head coaches handed Jamarcus Russell blank DVDs.
you know what? I think that he's a heel because it shows what self-destruction really is about. Whereas Vic's story is a story of redemption. It's a story of, getting out of your own way. It's a story of getting yourself all the way together, understanding, looking in the man in the mirror. I think Jamarcus Russell's story is kind of the exact opposite. Now, granted, after a while, he got a hold of it, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to resurrect his NFL career. But it just goes to show you what laziness will do. It goes to show
Mm-hmm.
you what self-indulgence will do. Getting caught up in the traffics of success will do. Not doing what you're supposed to will do. It just goes to show you what happens when you don't do those things.
And he was
And
significantly talented coming out of LSU. If you talk to the draft experts, Todd McShay, Mel Kiper Jr., best pro day that they ever saw was one Jamarcus Russell. And he, prototypical 6'6", 260, 265, cannon of an arm. Mel Kiper Jr. even mentioned him in the same sentence with John Elway. And
yeah,
now when you look at it, it's nowhere near that. And that's because Jamarcus did not take his football career seriously. He let a lot of things get in his way. In fairness to in fairness to Jamarcus, Flemlow Raps, please go like and subscribe to his content. He talked about the story, and also Tom Rinaldi. He used to did a piece on Jamarcus Russell back in ESPN. He's now at Fox Sports. Jamarcus was dealing with a lot of personal problems at that time because he lost both of his uncles, Uncle Ray Ray and Uncle Mike, due to health problems. And because of that, that took such a huge toll on Jamarcus, to which in the 2009 season, he did let himself completely go. I mean, he was at over 300 pounds at that time. Jeff Garcia even mentioned it, and he was a former teammate of Jamarcus back in Oakland. And he struggled during that season. I mean, remember his rookie year, he held out because again of that contract. Remember Kirk Morrison, champ, in which he talked about the story in which Jamarcus handed out remember throwing ones, and they kind of knew that we got some issues with Jamarcus. Then let's not forget the lean.
yeah. Like I said, I understand that part of it because when you lose a loved
And
one, you don't know how that's going to affect. If you really, really look at it,
yeah, in fairness, to put it into context and perspective, people don't want to take that into consideration.
yeah. But the thing is, he was on that path to laziness long before that even happened.
True.
When the thing is, when you talk about, and I'll give you a good comparison. When you talk about Mike Tyson with Costamato and Jimmy Jacobs, he was on the path of success, discipline, determination, structure, and just he had that map already just mapped out for him. When Costamato died, that's when the structure broke down. Before that, and even after that, when Jimmy Jacobs was still his manager, he was still on track to success when Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton was his management team. It wasn't until Jimmy Jacobs died and he moved on to Don King. That's when he became on the path to self-destruction. Jamarcus Russell, long before that even happened, he was already on that path to laziness. He was already on that path to self-loathing. He was already on that path to not studying. So the thing is, once something tragic happens, we used to say this in the Army all the time. When tragedy strikes, what you're trained to do and what you're training to do is what's going to show. I'll say that again. We say this. We used to say this in the Army all the time. Shout out to Drill Sergeant Felici and Sergeant Walls, Drill Sergeant Walls. Those are my two drill sergeants that trained me in basic training. They always said, when tragedy strikes and when adversity strikes, what you trained to do, what you were trained to do, and the habits that you're formed is what's going to show. So, with that being said, if you are trained when the bullets come down range and they're trying to hurt you on the battlefield, the first thing that's going to kick in, if you have great habits and you have great skill and you have the structure within yourself to say, hey, I have to knuckle down and get to it on this battlefield, then guess what? That's what you're going to do. If you don't have that structure in the first place, then that's what's going to take over. The self-loathing, the self-hatred, all of the bad things that's going to happen. So the thing is, it wasn't like a Mike Tyson situation where he was on the path to flat out greatness and he was on the path to, being one of the greatest of all time. Jamarcus Russell was already making those hard beds long before any of those things happened. He showed up to rookie camp, not in the best shape in the world. Even the very next season, drinking the lean, going to the club, not watching film. The habits that you make, those are what's going to come in handy when disaster strikes. They teach you that in the Army. Not only that, my father taught me that, man. I'm training you to do this because this is what you're going to need to do when tragedy strikes. You're going to need to be poised. You're going to need to be stoic. You're going to need to be unemotional. You're going to need to be in a situation to where everybody's going to look, who needs to look at you, can look at you and say, we need you, and you can be there for them. But when tragedy strikes and you've already put yourself into a bad habit of being lazy, self-loathing, I'm going to go party every night.
That's my point. That's my point. That's my point, Chad. That's my point. He was having problems long before. I understand that. But to lose family members, if you lose loved ones, and if you're dealing with these problems, imagine how much the problems are going to be, even bigger. And unfortunately, with Jamarcus, his final year in Oakland, 3 touchdown passes to 11 interceptions. 3 touchdown passes to 11 interceptions. I'm reading the stats right here. His stats regarding his career. 3 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. His final year in Oakland with a completion percentage of 48.8%. And when he was the starter, they were 2-7. And 3 years. Remember, that's how long an NFL player is supposed to last in the NFL, right? 3 years. That's how long he lasted in the NFL. And then after that, it was over. I'm glad for Jamarcus that he has turned around his life. There was some type of accusation that he was dealing with. Something I don't remember exactly, but Jamarcus, I say heel, champ, because he had so much talent in the world. Jamarcus, you know how I view Jamarcus, BRF and champ, the same way y'all view Jeff George. Y'all can't stand Jeff George. Y'all don't like Jeff George for his attitude. Now, Jamarcus was far worse as far as his professionalism and play, but that's how I think of Jamarcus. Jamarcus had so much talent coming out of LSU. And instead of using your God-given ability and the talent that God blessed you with, you took it for granted. You wasted it. Had Jamarcus Russell had the maturity and the focus, maybe he could have been he would have been a hell of a lot better than what he left out in his career in Oakland. Could he have been one of the greatest quarterbacks ever? I don't know, but it could have been a hell of a lot better than what he left out on the table in Oakland. And remember, Lane Kiffin, keep in mind, champ, Lane Kiffin, he kind of knew he did not want Jamarcus. Remember, he wanted Calvin Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted Calvin Johnson with the number 1 overall pick. But rest his soul, Al Davis saw the Sugar Bowl game in which Jamarcus lit up like a Christmas tree against Notre Dame. And Jamarcus at that time was the consensus choice for the number 1 overall pick because, of course, you're the quarterback and he had all the physical tools.
Yeah. And unfortunately for Al Davis, there was a guy named Daryl LaMonica that he coached, that Al Davis coached when he was at the Oakland Raiders. Because remember, when Al Davis first started, he was the coach, the general manager, and even minority owner. I don't believe Al Davis never forgot Daryl LaMonica. Because ever since then, he's been trying to find the next Daryl LaMonica, the Mad Bombers.
BRF, is there anything you want to add?
Honestly, no, not well. I guess when you argue from that standpoint, I guess you hate to say that he's a heel, but I mean, you have to, like, if you go back to his time in LSU and how immensely talented he was, and it wasn't just the fact that it was his arm strength, but I mean, you look at him being 6'6", 265, and being the athlete that he was at his peak in LSU. It was his ability, his mobility, his ability to run and make plays with his feet. I mean, I feel like that was like one of the scariest. I feel like that was like the scariest part about it. It wasn't just the fact that his arm was just ungodly. It was his ability to move and his ability to run and get first downs with his feet. And you just really, you felt like it was gonna translate. So I mean, you just the laziness really kicking in and really taking over and really kind of like it you hate to see that happen. And like you said, yeah, he definitely did have his personal issues and things that he had dealt with, in the NFL. But yeah, like you could see the laziness, like you could see it like from the jump. And it's one of those things that, you wish he was better, but sometimes it's kind of one of those, it is what it is. I'm definitely glad he's on track. I'm glad he's got himself together. But I guess for the amount of potential that he had when he got drafted to being arguably the biggest bust in the history of the NFL, yeah, I guess you do have to go. You have to go heel, like the immeasurable abilities to just basically kind of like flatline him when you got to the league. So yeah, he had to be a heel for me too.
I think if we had a discussion, maybe we'll mention his name, Ryan Leaf. I can
He's up there as
understand
biggest bust ever.
Yeah, as far as bust, but as babyface, heel, or tweener, you could say heel because of how his career was. Because again, either him or Peyton Manning, and of course the great executive, of the Bills, Bill of the Colts, champ Bill Polian decided to roll with Peyton. But if Ryan Leaf, I could say tweener because of how the way he's turned around his life. He had a lot of personal problems, not only in his career, but also outside, and how he's become like a mentor and stuff like that. It's just sad that with Jamarcus because he had so much talent, and I just felt like he could have capitalized off of it, but he took it for granted. Michael Vick, we had the discussion with Michael Vick, even though Michael Vick in Atlanta did not take his football career seriously. He admitted he was the first guy to leave, the last one to show up to the building. And he didn't take his career as seriously as he should have. But at the same time, at least he turned it around in Philadelphia and now he's turning around post NFL career.